The snow was falling thick and heavy that December afternoon when I got the call that would change everything. I was sitting in my small apartment in downtown Chicago, watching the flakes drift past my window, thinking about what cookies I'd bake for Christmas dinner at my parents' house. I'm Sarah, I'm 32 years old, and up until that moment, I thought I knew exactly where I belonged in this world. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, like you were somehow less than everyone else, hit that like button and subscribe because you're going to want to hear how this story ends. My phone buzzed on the coffee table and I saw my younger sister Emma's name flash across the screen. We'd always been close, or at least I thought we had been. She was calling from outside somewhere. I could hear the wind whipping in the background and the distant sound of traffic. Her voice was hesitant, careful, like she was trying to figure out how to tell me something she knew would hurt. That's when she said it. Mom and Dad don't want you at Christmas this year. The words didn't make sense at first. I actually laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke, some weird prank that would make sense in a minute. But Emma wasn't laughing. She was quiet, and in that silence I felt something inside me crack. She explained that our parents were hosting Christmas at a beautiful rental house they'd found in Lake Forest, one of those stunning old estates with stone facades and sprawling grounds covered in ancient oak trees. They'd invited Emma and her husband, my older brother Marcus and his wife and kids, even our cousins from Milwaukee. Everyone was invited. Everyone except me. When I asked why, Emma's voice got even smaller. She said Mom told her I'd been too focused on my career, too distant, too different from the rest of the family. That I made everyone uncomfortable with my success. That this Christmas was supposed to be intimate, just for people who really felt like family. I sat there in my apartment after we hung up, watching the Chicago skyline disappear behind the snow, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Not just hurt, not just anger, but this cold, clarifying rage that seemed to burn away every excuse I'd ever made for them. See, I'd spent my entire life trying to prove I was good enough for my family. I was the middle child, the one who was always just a little too much or not enough. Too ambitious when I got my MBA. Too serious when I started my own consulting firm. Too busy when I couldn't make it to every single family gathering because I was building something real, something mine. Growing up in our house in Evanston had been like living in a constant competition where I never quite understood the rules. My mother, Patricia, had always favored Marcus, her firstborn, the golden child who became a dentist and married his high school sweetheart. Emma was the baby, sweet and compliant, who became an elementary school teacher and lived just 10 minutes from our parents. And then there was me, Sarah, the one who asked too many questions, who wanted more than what our small world offered, who left for college and came back different. My father, Robert, was a quiet man who worked in insurance and seemed to view my ambition as something vaguely threatening, like I was rejecting everything he'd built by wanting something different. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the Christmases past, the ones where I'd shown up with expensive gifts and genuine excitement, only to feel like I was somehow performing, auditioning for a role I'd never quite land. I remembered being 14 and telling my parents I wanted to start my own business someday, and my mother laughing and saying I should focus on finding a nice husband instead. I remembered being 26 and getting promoted to senior consultant, and my father asking when I was going to settle down and do something normal. Every memory felt different now, tinted with this new understanding that maybe I'd never been the problem. Maybe they were. By morning I'd made a decision. I called my real estate agent, Jennifer, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd helped me buy my apartment 3 years earlier. I told her I needed to find a house in Lake Forest and I needed to find it fast. She was confused at first, asking if I was looking to relocate, but I just told her to trust me. Within 2 hours she'd sent me a list of available properties. And there, third from the top, was the address Emma had accidentally mentioned during our call. The Whitmore Estate, a stunning 1920s mansion with 6 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a library with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a dining room that could seat 20 people. It was listed for sale and the owners were motivated. The asking price was $2.4 million. I had the money. My consulting firm had been incredibly successful, and I'd been smart with my investments. I'd been saving for something big, maybe a house in the suburbs eventually, maybe a vacation property. But this felt right in a way I couldn't quite explain. This wasn't just about buying a house. This was about reclaiming something, about refusing to be erased. I called Jennifer back and told her to make an offer. Full asking price, cash, close in 2 weeks. She tried to talk me into negotiating, but I didn't want to risk it. I wanted that house and I wanted it before Christmas. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, inspections, and wire transfers. The sellers were an elderly couple moving to Florida to be near their grandchildren, and they were thrilled with my offer. Everything moved faster than I'd ever seen a real estate deal move. My lawyer, David, kept asking if I was sure about this, if I'd really thought it through. But I had. For the first time in my life, I was absolutely certain about something. I was going to own the house where my family planned to celebrate Christmas without me. And I wasn't going to tell them until the perfect moment. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with messages from Emma. She felt guilty, I could tell. She kept sending me texts saying she wished things were different, that she'd tried to convince Mom and Dad to include me. But she hadn't tried hard enough, had she? None of them had. Marcus didn't even bother to call. My parents certainly didn't. It was like I'd already been erased from the family narrative, written out of the story they were telling themselves about who they were. The closing happened on December 20th, 5 days before Christmas. I stood in the lawyer's office in downtown Lake Forest, signing page after page, and with each signature I felt lighter. The elderly couple, the Hendersons, were there too, and Mrs. Henderson kept talking about all the wonderful Christmases they'd had in that house over the past 40 years. She said she hoped I'd fill it with love and laughter. I smiled and told her I had plans for this Christmas that were going to be unforgettable. When I walked out of that office with the keys in my hand, the winter sun was breaking through the clouds, making the snow-covered streets sparkle like something out of a movie. I drove to the house immediately. The Whitmore estate sat at the end of a long tree-lined drive, set back from the road behind a stone wall covered in ivy. The house itself was magnificent, all gray stone and tall windows, with a circular driveway and a fountain in the front that had been drained for winter. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, and the smell of old wood and history washed over me. The entrance hall had a grand staircase that curved up to the second floor, and to the left was the living room with its massive fireplace. To the right was the dining room, the one where my family had planned to gather without me. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I hired a cleaning service to make the house spotless. I brought in furniture for the main rooms, nothing too elaborate, just enough to make it clear someone lived here now. I hung my diplomas in the library, my MBA from Northwestern, my undergraduate degree from the University of Chicago. I put family photos on the mantle, but only photos of me, my friends, my life. I was erasing them the way they'd tried to erase me, and it felt powerful. On December 23rd, I got a call from an unknown number. It was the property management company my parents had used to rent the house. The woman on the phone sounded confused and apologetic. She said there'd been a mistake, that the house they'd rented to the Patterson family for Christmas was no longer available because it had been sold. She said they were trying to find an alternative property, but everything was booked for the holidays. I asked her to give me the contact information for the renters, and after some hesitation she did. It was my father's cell phone number. I waited. I knew the call would come. Sure enough, that evening my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was tight with stress and barely concealed anger. "Sarah, did you buy the house in Lake Forest?" I told her I had. There was a long silence, and then she asked why. I could hear my father in the background saying something I couldn't make out. I told her the truth. I said I bought it because I wanted a house in Lake Forest and this one was perfect. I didn't mention Christmas. I didn't mention the rental. I just let her sit with the reality of what had happened. He tried to guilt me. She said I was being petty, that I was ruining Christmas for everyone, that I should be ashamed of myself. And something in me just snapped. I told her that I'd spent 32 years trying to be good enough for her, trying to fit into the box she wanted me in, and I was done. I told her that she was the one who decided I wasn't family enough to invite to Christmas, and now she was upset because I'd bought a house? The hypocrisy was stunning. She started to cry, which was her usual tactic when she wasn't getting her way, but this time it didn't work. I told her I had to go and I hung up. That night I sat in the library of my new house, looking out at the snow-covered grounds, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real, genuine peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just done with the whole toxic dynamic that had defined my relationship with my family for so long. I'd spent so much energy trying to make them see me, trying to make them proud, and for what? So they could exclude me from Christmas and act like I was the problem? Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I'd invited some friends over, people who'd become my chosen family over the years. My best friend Rachel, who I'd known since college. My business partner Tom and his husband. A few other close friends who didn't have family nearby. We cooked together in the massive kitchen, laughing and drinking wine, and the house felt alive in a way I don't think it had in years. We ate dinner in that dining room, the one my parents had planned to use, and we toasted to new beginnings and to the family we choose. Around 8 o'clock there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone else, so I was surprised when I opened it to find Emma standing there, shivering in the cold. She looked miserable, her eyes red from crying. She asked if she could come in and I let her. We stood in the entrance hall and she told me everything. How Mom and Dad had been furious when they found out I owned the house. How they'd scrambled to find another place and ended up booking a cramped rental cottage that was nothing like what they'd planned. How the whole family was there and everyone was uncomfortable and tense, and Mom kept crying and Dad kept raging about how I'd humiliated them. Emma said she couldn't stay there. She said she'd finally realized how toxic it all was, how they'd treated me my entire life, and she was sorry. She was so sorry. She asked if she could stay with me if there was room. I looked at my little sister, really looked at her, and I saw someone who was finally waking up to the reality I'd been living with for years. I told her of course she could stay. I introduced her to my friends and we made room at the table, and she cried a little more, but this time they were different tears. Relief maybe. Or recognition. Christmas morning was quiet and beautiful. The sun came up over the frozen lake in the distance, turning everything gold and pink. Emma and I sat in the library drinking coffee and she told me more about what had happened. Marcus had apparently defended Mom and Dad, saying I was being vindictive and cruel. But his wife had actually spoken up, saying maybe I had a point, that maybe the family needed to look at how they treated me. It had caused a huge fight. The cousins from Milwaukee had left early. The whole carefully planned Christmas had fallen apart. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, if I'd been too harsh. But then I remembered that phone call from Emma, the one where she told me I wasn't invited. I remembered every dismissive comment, every time my achievements were minimized, every time I was made to feel like I was too much or not enough. And I realized I hadn't gone too far. I'd finally gone far enough. I'd finally stood up for myself in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Over the next few weeks I settled into my new house. I worked from the library, taking video calls with clients against the backdrop of those beautiful windows. I explored Lake Forest, discovering coffee shops and bookstores and walking trails along the lake. I started to build a life there, a real life, not just an escape from my family but something genuine and mine. Emma went back to her husband after Christmas, but we talked more honestly than we ever had before. She was starting to set boundaries with our parents too, starting to see the patterns I'd been pointing out for years. My parents didn't call. Marcus sent one text saying I owed everyone an apology, which I ignored. But slowly, quietly, things began to shift. In February my mother sent a card. Not an apology, not exactly, but an acknowledgement. She said she'd been thinking about things, about how she'd treated me over the years. She said she wanted to talk, really talk, if I was willing. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to figure out what I wanted, what kind of relationship, if any, I could have with them moving forward. Spring came to Lake Forest in a rush of green and blooming flowers. The grounds of the Whitmore estate came alive, and I hired a gardener to help me restore the old flower beds. I hosted a dinner party in April and Emma came with her husband. Rachel brought her new girlfriend. Tom and his husband brought their adopted daughter. We filled that dining room with laughter and love, and I realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation or performance or constant judgment, but genuine connection and acceptance. In May, I finally agreed to meet my mother for coffee. We met at a cafe in Evanston, neutral territory. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile. She apologized, really apologized, for the first time in my life. She said she'd been threatened by my success, that she'd projected her own regrets and disappointments onto me. She said she'd been wrong to exclude me from Christmas, wrong about so many things. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were still moments where she got defensive, where she tried to justify her actions. But it was a start. My father took longer. He was a proud man, and admitting he'd been wrong didn't come easily. But in July he showed up at my house unannounced. He stood in the entrance hall, the same place Emma had stood on Christmas Eve, and he looked around at what I'd built. He told me he was proud of me. He said he should have said it years ago, should have supported me instead of making me feel like I had to choose between my family and my dreams. We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But we shook hands and it felt like something. Marcus never apologized. Some people can't see past their own narrative, can't admit when they've been complicit in something hurtful. But I made peace with that too. I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't need any of their validation. I'd found something more valuable than their approval. I'd found myself. By the time the next Christmas rolled around, everything had changed. I hosted dinner at the Whitmore estate, and this time it was my choice. Emma came with her husband. My parents came, tentative and careful, trying to navigate this new dynamic where I held the power. Rachel and Tom and all my chosen family were there too. Marcus didn't come, and I didn't miss him. We ate in that dining room, the one that had started all of this, and it felt like a reclamation. Not revenge, not anymore, but something deeper. A statement that I belonged, that I'd always belonged, and that I didn't need anyone's permission to take up space in this world. As I stood at the head of the table that Christmas, looking at the faces of the people who truly loved me, I thought about that phone call a year earlier. The one that had broken something in me but also freed me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the best thing, because it forces you to stop accepting less than you deserve. It forces you to build something new, something true. My parents had said I wasn't invited to Christmas, so I bought the house where they planned the dinner. But more than that, I bought my freedom. I bought my peace. I bought a life where I didn't have to shrink myself to make other people comfortable. And standing there in my beautiful house, surrounded by love and laughter and the smell of roasting turkey and fresh-baked pie, I realized something profound. Home isn't where your family is. Home is where you're valued, where you're seen, where you're celebrated for exactly who you are. And I'd finally found mine. The snow was falling outside the tall windows, covering the grounds in white, and inside the fire was crackling and the candles were glowing, and everything felt exactly as it should. I'd spent so many years chasing their approval, trying to earn a place at their table. But in the end, I'd built my own table, and it was so much better than anything they could have offered me. This is my story. The story of how being excluded became the greatest gift I ever received. The story of how I learned that sometimes you have to lose your family to find yourself. And the story of how a house became more than just a house. It became a symbol of everything I'd overcome, everything I'd built, and everything I'd finally allowed myself to become. I'm Sarah, I'm 33 now, and I'm home. If you made it all the way here with me through every twist and turn of this journey, I'm grateful you stayed. Stories like this aren't easy to tell, and they're not always easy to hear, but they matter. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most beautiful transformations. If this resonated with you, if you felt something shift inside while listening, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories like this one, stories about people who found the courage to choose themselves, and I think you'll want to hear them. Leave a comment saying, "I chose myself too," if you stayed until the end. I read every single one, and it means more than you know to see this community growing, to know we're all supporting each other through these complicated, messy, beautiful lives we're living. And if you wouldn't mind hitting that like button, it helps more people find these stories, more people who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries, it's okay to walk away, it's okay to build something new. There's another story waiting for you right now, one that I think you're going to connect with just as deeply. Go ahead and click on the next video. I'll be there, ready to share another chapter, another journey, another reminder that we're all stronger than we think we are.